Hey, it's that time again. Time for another episode of Shelve It or Shove It, the completely superficial way to pick books for your TBR based solely on their covers. I'm your host, Daisy X Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. If you haven't seen this before, I go onto Goodreads, new releases, pick the books for the previous month, in this case, January, to pick one book for my TBR in February. And I look at the categories of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So let's go ahead and get started with science fiction. First up is Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. Nnedi Okorafor is a very renowned and well-known author now in the science fiction community, at least, who is an African futurist. Not Afrofuturist, African futurist. I did a whole video, which you can check out if you're interested. And this has a bust of a woman, and behind her are computer chips, I think. This is about AI books. This is about the death of the author because AI is going to take over and write books. Says the future of storytelling is here. I am into it. I'm into the concept. The cover's okay, but now that I'm looking at it and getting the title and the concept, I am quite intrigued because it is a hot topic. Will AI take over creative works such as writing novels? I'm going to go ahead and shelve it. Next up is All the Water in the World by Aaron Caffel. Caffel. And there is a city underwater, so I'm thinking climate fiction or eco-fiction. There's skyscrapers and tall buildings all underwater. I'm not that interested in this one. I don't believe I would pick this one just by the cover. It's not that intriguing. I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Hamajang Luck by Makana Yamamoto. And there's a tagline: how come one last job never actually means that? And there's also a little sci-fi heist. So I'm thinking Ocean's 11, Six of Crows, that type of thing. I do like this illustration a lot. I'm not that crazy of that mustard yellow color, which takes up a lot of this artwork, but the artwork itself I'm into. So, you know what? I like heist books in sci-fi. I'm going to go ahead and shelve it. Next up is We Lived on the Horizon by Erica Swiler. Author of the Book of Speculation. Don't know that book, don't know this author, don't like this cover. There are sand dunes, it looks like there's this boxy feeling to it, and a little window with clouds. I don't know what this could be about. There's a recommendation by Sequoia Namagatsu, which doesn't tell us what it's about either. I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Emily Jane, Here Beside the Rising Tide. Now, I read Emily Jane's debut novel, On Earth as It Is on Television, and it was one of my top books of 2023. I am so happy to see she has a second book out, and I like this cover. I like sort of this cutout with the font of the title in water, and the title itself is kind of cute because it rhymes, Beside the Rising Tide. Love, there's a little tagline, love, fun, sun, and sea monsters. So, and we see a little sea monster, we see a little carnival or boardwalk with a roller coaster and one of those whirly rides, and the cover is very clean. This reminds me of the cover I saw for On Earth as It Is on Television. I'm a fan. And I'm a fan of this author. I'm going to go ahead and shelve it. Now we move on to fantasy, and first up is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. So this is a Fourth Wing novel. Now, I believe these are romanticies, and I'm a little disappointed in Goodreads because I thought they were separating romantasy from fantasy, but apparently not, at least in these new releases. So I'm not a fan of romantasy, and this is a later book in her series, so I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Immortal by Sue Lynn Tan, author of Daughter of the Moon Goddess. I believe I read that and I really did like it. This cover is gorgeous. I love sort of these cutouts, these vibrant colors, that gold. There's these two people sort of floating to meet, and it looks like a romantasy. And although I like everything about this, I don't want to pick up a romantasy, so just for that reason, I'm going to shove it. Next up is Lightfall by Ed Crocker, book 1 of the something Everlands. Now, I don't like picking up a book 1 when the second or third book isn't out, especially from an author I don't know. And the cover isn't that interesting. There's this red crescent moon. Could it be Soviet Union? There's no sickle. I don't know what this setting is. I'm just not a big fan of this cover. So I'm going to shove it. Next up is Water Moon by Samantha Sato Yambao. I really like this illustration. I don't like whoever did the layout on the cover, that Water Moon is sort of blocking a lot of this artwork, because I really like that artwork. I wish Water Moon was sort of in the corner or something. But I like this sort of pastel artwork with the city underneath, and it looks like a less modern city on top, the modern city in the reflection. I love how these boats are these little folded origami boats, and it definitely gives me an Asian vibe. I like it. I like it. I'm going to shelve it. Finally, in fantasy, we have Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. I love this cover. I love how retro it is. This looks like, from the font and the layout, this looks like you could have picked it up from the 70s. Author of How to Sell a Haunted House. That title is familiar. And there's this lava lamp, again, from the 70s or 60s. And there's this hand floating in it. I know in some dark witchcraft, the hand of a murderer does something for spells. And there's some moths. I like everything about this cover. Everything. I'm going to, of course, shelve it. Next up is horror. First up is I Am the Dark by Jameson Shee. And there's a tagline that, I think this is all one title. I am the dark that answers when you call. I believe that's the whole title, maybe. There's this woman dripping in blood, and her face is cracking, and there's these red ribbons. I kind of wish this is a little more photorealistic. I usually don't say that, but this looks a little cartoony for this type of cover, unless it's a graphic novel, which I don't think it is. It's not grabbing me. It's not grabbing me enough to want to pick it up based just on the cover. I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is The Dead of Winter. Beware the Krampus and other wicked Christmas creatures. What? Okay, I'm not going to go into how I pick horror new releases. This obviously was a Christmas release. That's fine. It's an anthology of wicked Christmas creatures. Is Krampus a real thing? I remember seeing some movies with Krampus, and I don't know if that's actually in folklore. It seems like it'd be weird if it was. My favorite sort of wicked Santa movie was I believe it was Finnish, but it was one of those European movies called Rare Exports or Imports. I don't know. I'll put the poster up here. Fantastic horror movie, really, really spooky. But I'm not picking up an anthology of wicked Christmas creatures. I think I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is The Whispering Night by Susan Dennard. Anyway, I kind of like the juxtaposition between the font. It kind of looks like those old romance novels, The Whispering Night, and there's like these flowers, but they're all entwined in this skeleton of a snake. I guess it's a snake. I don't know if snake skeletons actually look like that, but it looks pretty creepy. And yeah, it's a nice juxtaposition. I'm intrigued. And there's a recommendation by Lee Bardugo. So, oh, wait a minute. You'll want to get lost in the world of the Luminaries again and again. So, is this a sequel to the Luminaries? I don't know. Anyway, just based on the cover, I'm going to go ahead and shelve it. Next up in horror is Streetlight People by Charlene Thomas. Now, on first blush, I wasn't that interested in sort of this dark cover with sort of this orange lighting, but the title says Streetlight People, and I'm kind of intrigued since this is in horror. Is this a new type of creature that only lives in streetlights or attracted to streetlights? I'm really intrigued, and with the title and the look of this cover, they just seem to be working together to make me wonder what are streetlight people, because we have this streetlight, we have this figure underneath it. I'm intrigued. I'm going to shelve it. Finally in horror is Perfect Girl by Tracy Banghart. Perfection can be deadly is a tagline, and there's this girl putting on makeup in a switchblade. You know, for horror, I like supernatural horror. I'm not a big fan of slashers. That's what this looks like it is. So, and I'm not a big fan of the cover, although I appreciate it. Looks kind of like a romance illustration, but for spooky horror something. That's kind of cute, but not cute enough to pick it up just based on the cover. So yeah, I'm going to have to shove it. Okay, I don't know what's going on, but I shelved a lot of books this month. 3 science fiction, 2 fantasy, and 2 horror. So, in science fiction, I shelved Death of the Author by Nanette Okorafor, Hamajang Yamamoto, and Emily James, Here Beside the Rising Tide. In fantasy, we did Watermoon by Samantha Sato Yambao and Grady Hendrix, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. In horror, we shelved The Whispering Night by Susan Dennard and Streetlight People by Charlene Thomas. So, very eclectic. The Nanette Okorafor book, I'm mostly going by the concept that I believe the cover and the title is telling me, AI replacing authors. Sounds very cerebral, and it may be a little depressing. I don't know. I'm kind of impressed that this book is published so quickly as we're having this conversation about AI. Homage Unlock is a heist. Emily James is going to be whimsical and fun. Watermoon, I'm going to say no to Watermoon. The reason being, it just seems to fade away when next to the other covers. I still love Grady Hendrix, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, and the 2 horrors, Whispering Night, Streetlight People. I am really curious about Streetlight People because it sounds like a different type of monster, a different type of horror, and I wonder what the twist is. Okay, you may think I'm crazy, but I'm going to go with the fantasy Grady Hendrix's Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. That cover is just doing it for me. It's evoking the 70s, and I love the design, the font, the illustration. Everything is just firing on all cylinders. That's what I want to say. Firing on all cylinders. And there's a lot of covers here and concepts here that I'm really intrigued by, but I'm going with the Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. Let's go ahead and read the blurb and see what I've gotten myself into. There's power in a book. They call them wayward girls, loose girls, girls who grew up too fast. And they're sent to the Wellwood home in St. Augustine, Florida, where unwed mothers are hidden by their families to have their babies in secret, give them up for adoption, and most important of all, to forget any of it ever happened. 15-year-old Fern arrived at the home in the sweltering summer of 1970, pregnant, terrified, and alone. Under the watchful eye of the stern Miss Wellwood, she meets a dozen other girls in the same predicament. There's Rose, a hippie who insists she's going to find a way to keep her baby and escape to a commune. And Zinnia, a budding musician who knows she's going to go home and marry her baby's father. And Holly, a wisp of a girl, barely 14, mute, and pregnant by no one knows who. Everything the girls eat, every moment of their waking day, and everything they're allowed to talk about is strictly controlled by adults who claim they know what's best for them. Then Fern meets a librarian who gives her an occult book about witchcraft, and power is in the hands of the girls for the first time in their lives. But power can destroy as easily as it creates, and it's never given freely. There's always a price to be paid, and it's usually paid in blood. Okay, here's one of those cases where the blurb matches the cover to a T. It's the 1970s. We have a lot of very young girls. I'm not crazy about that, but they're all pregnant and in this home for unwed mothers, and they seem to have their own agenda, but then they find witchcraft and power is in their hands for the first time. For some reason, I'm getting Ryan Murphy's The Coven, his witch series in American Horror, which I loved, by the way, and I hope I'm going to love this one. But what I'd really love to know is which books you would have picked based solely on their covers. Let me know down in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.